Good afternoon or evening, depending where you're joining us. Sorry about the technical delays there, but this is live production, so we'll roll with the punches and here we go. But thank you so much for joining us for another installment of our Creative Forces event. I'm very excited to be rejoined by good friends David Kruta and Alexander Hankoff. We did an event probably about a year ago, I'd say, back in the old space. Before all this, so this was kind of a repeat session, so it's kind of great to bring the band back together as it were. So I'm going to do really quick introductions if you don't mind, and I'll throw it over back to Alexander and David because I'm sure they'll have more to add to it, but I just wanted to introduce my special guest today. So Alexander Hankoff is a New York City based cinematographer. As a young filmmaker, he collaborated with photographers such as Stephen Klein, and then transitioned into fashion, advertising, and editorial video work for brands such as Dior, Prada, Calvin Klein, and magazines such as Vogue. His ad work, paired with his short narrative and doc films, have attracted brands such as Peloton, Estee Lauder, Clinique, Uniqlo, Tommy Hilfiger, and Woolrich. When not working in the ad industry, Alexander is focused on his personal work, like his award-winning doc film series NYC Chapters, which I believe is in 5 episodes now for season 1. We are also joined by David Kruta, who is an award-winning director of photography, also New York City based, has shot a lot of feature films, commercials, documentaries, fashion, and music videos. He lends the Sundance competing feature film Concussion, starring Robin Weigart and Maggie Siff, and most recently won the Haskell Wexler Award for Best Cinematography at the Woodstock Film Festival for The Sounding. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate you spending the time, carving a little time out of your schedules and saying hello to us. And again, sorry for the technical delays, but I did want to, if you don't mind, we'll just do maybe in alphabetical order. Alexander, if there's anything you wanted to add to your bio that I missed, by all means, please. I would love to hear more from you.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty up to date. Yeah, I mean I started my career kind of picking up a camera and figuring it out on my own for the most part, and helped with some photographers transitioning from video into cinema, sort of in the mid 2000s or 2010s. But yeah, I work as a cinematographer and director. I shoot a lot of the stuff that I direct, although tried to get David on a job recently to work with me as a DP for the first time. Unfortunately, it didn't work out because unions are tricky. But yeah, shoot a lot of my own stuff, and currently working on a few personal projects as we're in the midst of this, unfortunate situation. And yeah, just trying to stay busy.
Sorry, I muted myself. I forgot. Thank you for that, Alexander. David, and again, I throw it over to you for anything that I may have missed during your intros. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you.
Sure. Like you said, New York-based DP. I do primarily commercials, but I've been jumping back into features. Actually shot one in December and was hoping to kind of, roll that into more work in this year. Obviously, we're now stuck at home, so that's not happening. But we've actually been working remotely with some other DPs to do our pickup shots, and we've got some interesting solves for the flashback sequence we were supposed to shoot. So it's, kind of a bittersweet re-entry into the features world, but, I'm excited to do more. We're actually already starting to prep some other ones, so as soon as we get out of this, we can hit the ground running. So I'm excited for that.
Very cool. So again, thank you guys for joining us. Now the topic of this we mentioned was full format, in that you guys are very familiar with large format cameras, but obviously that's not all you work on, and that's not all the cameras that you use. Like obviously over your shoulder, David, we can see that you have an Alexa behind you, but I know, Alexander, you own an LF, and David, of course, you own the Mini. I apologize, over your shoulder, but you've also worked a lot on Sony VENICE. And last time we spoke, you were in the middle or just about wrapped with your project, The Last Job, when you showed us some fantastic stills where you were able to take the Venice and sort of use the Rialto, but you were in the backseat of a car. I guess it was right after the heist had wrapped for these guys, right? They robbed the bank, I believe. So it was really fascinating for some of those behind the scenes pictures that you showed us, was that we were able to see you basically crammed in the middle of the backseat with 4 other actors, and using that large format to your advantage because you're able to use sort of the wider angle of view to capture everyone, and you were kind of whip panning in between all that. But there's, much more to discuss than just sort of the camera choices. And a lot of the questions even that we saw on the way in to this event were based on what your guys' sort of prep format and how you decide on these sort of camera packages and looks. So I'd like to start there with kind of a general question for both of you. When you get a script in front of you, when someone pitches an idea, how do you prep for that mentally? Like, we'll get to gear later, but like first, like what informs your decision when picking that look? Like how do you say, okay, I want to use this camera, this lens combo, we're going to use these lights. Like, can you talk a little bit about sort of those decisions that you make as you start prepping for a project?
Do you want to go first, David?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, whenever I get a script, and especially this is more kind of in the narrative world, I like to pull a lot of references and just start kind of doing a high level take on what the look of the project is going to be like. So, I've lately been using mostly paintings and photography and kind of staying away from actual frames from movies. And I feel like that's helped enable, certain color palettes and textures that then we can translate ourselves onto the screen. This feature that I just did in December, we were pulling from, all sorts of old paintings. There's this one great Dutch painter who does these incredible night scenes. So we knew that we were going into it. It's set in the mid 1800s. It's realistically speaking, like everything would have been lit with candles. They didn't even have matches at this point. So what we realized was that they always had to have candles burning in a house, or they had to have a fireplace burning. So we used that as how we built the whole look of it, was thinking of that. So we were looking for paintings that were, the primary light sources were moonlight, there were candlelight, there were fire torches, like that sort of thing. So we pulled all that together and then started building from there. We went on our scouts and took a bunch of reference photos, and I did a bunch of camera tests as well. Actually, Abel gave me a room and a Venice and all your full frame glass, and I was sat there with a lighter and a couple little LEDs and just saw how everything like played with the different lenses, what the flaring was like or not like. And just sort of slowly built the look through experimentation, and some things didn't work and some things did, and the ones that did work made it into the film, and I think we really nailed that look. And so now there's talk of part of it being animated because we can't go shoot the flashbacks, and the paintings that we pulled originally as references are being used to inform what that animation is going to look like. So it all, creatively comes together like that.
Interesting. So obviously that's part of a solution to these times, is that you can take stuff that you hadn't shot and give it a flashback.
Totally.
Yeah. Alex, what about you? Like, what are sort of your thought processes when you first just get that piece of paper in front of you, the treatment or a script, as far as prepping?
Yeah. So, I shoot a lot of the stuff that I direct. And so for me, one of the first things that I need to know from a creative standpoint is usually what the budget is. I don't like jumping into projects without really knowing what we're capable of doing. It's great to have all these, big ideas, but then when it comes down to it, like, can we actually execute? So first thing I like to do is I like to take a look at the budget, see where we're at. See, I do a lot of commercial work. I don't do as much narrative stuff as David does. So when it comes to commercial work, it's about speaking with the agency and the creatives and the agency producers and the producers who I'm working with, and just trying to figure out logistically what's possible with what the budget is. And then based off of that sort of informs a lot of what goes into it from a technical standpoint. So, what kind of toys can we play with? What is our camera going to look like? One of the reasons why I went out and I bought the LF and my set of cooks was to be able to bring a high level of quality to the projects that I'm on, even if the budget is a little bit challenged. Because, I want everything that I do to be as, excellent as possible. And so, sometimes if the budget is a little bit less than, something that we would normally rent a expensive camera package for, I'll bring it on for a little bit less, only because I want the final product to be at a certain level. So again, budget really informs a lot of that stuff. And then once we get past that hump, then it's really just about what's the look? What kind of intimacy do we want with our subjects? You know, one of the issues with the LF that most folks have is that it is a pretty large, unwieldy camera. But you know, I've been running around New York solo shooting on it for the past month and a half, and I did my film Missing with the camera with a crew of 2 to 5 on a good day. And so, you know, I treat that camera like a documentary camera. I'm not afraid to put it down in the dirt. You know, it's my camera. I'll do what I want with it. And so, as long as you can, as long as you can shoulder it, you can kind of get those more sort of intimate moments and that sort of thing that people like, with the smaller cameras. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, to me, it's really just about the aesthetics that you get out of the equipment that you're working with. And I come from a 35 millimeter background, and so I see in my mind's eye a 35 millimeter frame with those lens choices and that sort of thing. So it's a lot easier for me to just kind of make that translation straight to the the full frame format rather than Super 35. Although even when I was shooting Super 35, it wasn't a killer. It's just nice to be able to go, okay, that's a 50, set it up, so that's what I like about shooting the full frame, and that's what informs my process. But I do love working with other cameras and different lenses and stuff. I recently did a Peloton campaign that is going to be released soon. We shot that full frame, and we used some vintage Canon lenses. Chris Probst was my DP on that one, and he brought on some glass, and we actually shot red full frame on that one because he's a red shooter, and it was cool watching him expose for red because I come from the red world too, and I never thought red could look that good, to be honest. So he did a damn good job. That guy's just such like a science nerd and knows everything about imaging and optics and stuff. I mean, like, I'm not technical like that, so it was cool watching him do his thing. But those lenses were beautiful because they were rehoused vintage glass, and it was cool to see what they could do and how they were flaring and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know. It's every job requires its own set of tools, but it is nice to have your own stuff that you're comfortable with, and your aesthetic feels consistent throughout the work that you do. I find I use the same tools for the most part on everything, and that way clients who see my reel, they go, okay, cool, we know we can make it look like that. You know what I mean? So that was kind of a long-winded response to that question, but yeah.
That was great. Thank you for that. And that kind of leads a little bit. I do want to show some of these clips that both of you are referring to, or still images. But that is an interesting point you brought up, which is putting your signature look on it. Putting your sort of stamp on it. Because I feel like when I speak to some DPs, there's two schools of thought. One very traditional school of thought is like, this is the way I work, this is how I look, essentially. So I'm going to stick with that. And if the project calls me, it's because they want that look. And the other school of thought, when I speak to some DPs, is I'm going to mold and bend a little bit to fit the project a little bit better. So it's interesting, and I would be curious where you both see yourselves fitting into that. Is it more of an even-handed thing, or would you say you're more on one side of the camp where like this is your established look, or is it more what the client needs, or director, or agency for working for ad company? Like how would you make that sort of decision?
I've been over the past few years, like I think earlier in my commercial career, I was really focused on delivering the look that the client wanted. And I think over the past few years, I've really been pushing more towards, having a style and doing what feels good for me. Typically what I like to say for commercials is I'll light it like a narrative, I'll do the shafts of light and haze and all that stuff. And then I'll just fill it in, until the client says, okay, good, we can see the faces enough. Which is not something I would typically do, on like a feature project or a passion project. But I think going more towards the direction of really having a point of view and having people hire you for the look that you create, I've just found that to be much more effective in my career, and I get more phone calls because of it. And my work, I'm more proud of my work. I'm happier with my body of work. And I think then that kind of creates a positive feedback loop where you then keep pushing it more and you're happier with your work. You push it more again. And that's, that's the direction I'm actively going in.
Interesting. What about you, Alexander? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've never really been one to sort of, I don't know, to do to attempt an aesthetic that I didn't feel was my own. You know, I've never really like tried to do something that's like, there was this one project once where I was like, okay, I want to go really contrasty, like film noir inspired, and that was great. That was the one time that I've ever done anything where it was like, all right, let's do like a style. Everything else for me has always been pretty organic and pretty naturalistic in my approach for the most part. I love pulling references, and I love like going through and building decks and looking at um, films that resonate with me and frames and stuff like that. But I just, for me, because I kind of direct and shoot simultaneously, it's always been kind of like an organic approach where I've got the camera on my shoulder. I know the lighting that I need to get the intimate sort of framing that I'm going for, and the environment that I can kind of run around in a little bit. And that's kind of that's the way I've always approached things. I'd love to do some more sort of
Well, looks like we may have lost him, or at least.
like, is it? Hello?
Yeah, a little bit.
Come back. It's like this is like one of those CNN newscasts when the reporters trying to get through that depth. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but but I would love to work with DPs in the future who have aesthetics that I admire. That way, I can bring some of that into my own work, as opposed to kind of like copying other people's looks or doing something that just doesn't come naturally to me. So yeah, that's. I always find that it's so cool to do the research and to read American Cinematographer and look at stuff of artists who I admire. But at the end of the day, it always ends up looking like my own stuff. You know, as much as I try to make it look like Deacons or Chivo or something, it's like, oh yeah, that's just Alex like trying to do something new. I don't know. It's weird. It's like I can't change out my eyeballs, and I think that other DPs are a lot more talented at that than I am. I have always just sort of done things in my own without a lot of support. So I think that that's probably where it comes from, is like everything kind of needs to be natural and approachable in that way. But that's why I admire David's work, because he has a style and he can kind of play around in different spaces, and his narrative stuff is great. His commercial stuff feels like a little bit more commercially, and it's just like I don't know. I feel like I've got one look, like Zoolander or something like.
Well, you bring up a good point, in that I think one of the most difficult things as a DP is to get asked to shoot second unit for someone and have to match the look that they're doing. I mean, I can't think of anything that would scare me more. And I've done second unit on a bunch of things, and it's really, really hard to not inject your own style into it. And I think you can see that even on big movies and whatnot. But that is a really tough thing. So I don't think there's anything bad with having your own style. I think that's why people hire you.
Right. That's how you carve out a name for yourself, or
Yeah.
And actually, on the topic of the look, I realized we haven't shown any footage yet. And for those that aren't familiar with Alex's and David's work, I think we should show some stuff. So I'd like to cue up first, I think. Alex, your short called Missing, we have a trailer for that. Is there anything you want to add to this to set up the clip, or should we just play it out? Just kind of on your topic of naturalistic and a lot of what looks like to me natural light. And that's
Sure.
a compliment, by the way, because that means it's fantastic looking. It's beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah. So Missing was essentially a glorified camera test. I wrote that screenplay with the intent of testing the LF and the cooks that I had recently taken ownership of through you guys, and so I wanted to kind of put it through its paces, see it in different locations, different lighting environments. I had access to some really wonderful exterior environments in Harriman State Park. I mean, we stole them all, but I had access to the service road. So, but Yeah, that project was really just like a big test, and we lit it a little bit. We used some practicals in some hotel rooms, and we had a couple Astera tubes and stuff like that just to kind of fill in, here and there. But for the most part, it was all naturally lit. And the one thing, and I was talking about aesthetic in that last question that you asked. This is sort of different than my regular aesthetic, to be honest, because before I understood that I could kind of shoulder the LF like I can my red that I was shooting on up until this project. uh, I wanted to treat this a little bit more like a movie camera, so to speak. So there were a lot of sort of like static shots, a lot of slow slider push-ins, and then we did some Steadicam work, and nothing was handheld. And that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of differentiate this project with from everything else I do, which is everything else I do is pretty much handheld and kind of like found in the moment. So it was cool for me with this project to kind of treat this big heavy camera a little bit more, seriously, and it kind of required that attention throughout the course of this project. And now that I'm used to it, I don't treat it with the kid gloves that I did when I first got it. But it was a cool project to kind of test the a little bit more of like a formulaic way of filming and setting up shots, and more composed than I normally go.
Very cool. So let's take a look at the trailer from Missing.
Stop saying that, please. Oh, he's gone. He's not coming back. Please, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Please.
I can't face you without him. I know what I have to do.
Yeah, that was great. So thank you for sharing that. And that, a lot of those shots that you mentioned, like in the field, you could sort of tell that has that kind of natural aesthetic and sort of texture, if you will, of shooting something with a larger sensor size. And, I'm sure you didn't try to necessarily always show off like you're saying, these are kind of glorified camera tests in your own words, but you didn't necessarily want to shoot everything wide open either, just for the sake of it, because I think that's a folly that a lot of folks maybe would make if they got their hands on a large format camera, is that they feel like they have to shoot everything at T1 or 1.7 just to get that super shallow depth of field. But in reality, it's about, I think, sort of the size of the landscape and the film plane, I guess, or the sensor size makes a big difference. So I'd like to pivot a little bit and switch over to something from David. So David, you did something with the International Rescue Committee called Dear Refugees, We Stand With You. And this, at least I saw it it got a lot of play a while ago. So I feel like many of us will have seen this work before, but I thought it was nice to bring up. And I believe you shot this on Venice, am I correct?
That's on Venice, yeah.
Yeah. So this was, we'll play it, and anything, let us know if there's anything you want to set up. But I thought this was fantastic, and it looked like all natural light inside this big kind of warehouse space that you had. Obviously, I'm sure you did a lot of treatments to make the lighting look as good as it did, but it had this really fantastic sort of palette to it as well. So is there anything you want to add to this as a setup before we show the clip?
Yeah, we actually didn't do a whole lot of lighting. Most of the light in there is coming in through the windows. We only had one little HMI, which we used for an eye light when it, could actually overpower the amount of light coming in through the windows. We just did a bit of shaping. But the fun part of this project was that we shot it all on my square front Lomos, and it's specifically the 80 millimeter, which covers the full 3x2 area of the Venice. So it has this large format anamorphic look to it, which I find really, really cool.
Oh yeah, I remember you did that. I think you did this at April. I think I was there when you happened to figure out that the Lomos would cover, right?
Yeah, we've I've been playing around with them for a while. I used the same set on a music video years ago, which I shot on the A7R2. And so we would, anytime that the lenses didn't cover fully, we would just crop it in. But the shots where it did cover, we would just leave in, because it gives you this like super shallow, but with, not like crazy fall off. So it's look where you can just kind of cut people out of the background, and it's really about them.
And I forgot to mention that we don't have this clip loaded up, but we can share the link to this clip for anyone else to watch it on David's website, and also at the top of his Instagram bio. You can go straight to it, to the actual piece. We got some great BTS shots here, and previously, of course, we were some frame grabs.
Yeah, that was great. That's Johan's the director. Johan Anderson was the director of that, and he's he and I have become good friends over the last few years, and he's fantastic to work with. I think I gravitate towards directors that I can be really open with, and they don't take any sort of creative suggestions as like me trying to take over their job or anything. It's really just about making the project as good as possible. And I personally, if I throw out a creative idea and they're like, I'm not into it at all, then I don't take any offense to that. I think having like an honest conversation about the project, without any sort of, like emotional attachment to certain things, and being able to just, throw ideas out and just have an honest conversation. I think that's key to some of these collaborations.
You say that's different, how you approach, say, a narrative piece or versus something like an ad? Or...
Yeah, I'd say in commercials, you don't, it depends on my relationship with the director. In commercials, I definitely kind of rein myself in a little bit. I don't comment as much on the creative. I try to stick with just the look and executing the look the way they want. If it's a job where I have a really good relationship with the director, I may throw some stuff out. But most of this stuff is really, more for narrative, passion projects, that sort of thing.
And then, interesting to note, I thought, between the two pieces, well, at least the frame grabs that we saw from the Dear Refugees piece versus Missing, was that Alex, you shot Missing in kind of the native sort of tall aspect ratio of the Alexa LF, and David, for the Dear Refugees piece, it looked like you had it in kind of a CinemaScope, like 23901. Is that a decision also that comes along with that prep process when you're talking to production or to a director or to the agency about what, how you'll finish it? Is it a different aspect ratio, and what does that look like in terms of that discussion and then the deliverables sort of conversation?
Alex, you want this one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, when I'm working with agencies, it's normally going to be finishing in a 16:9 or 1.85. But I gravitate more towards that anamorphic aspect ratio. To be honest, I find framing up in that aspect ratio a joy. I don't know what it is. It's working in the thirds. There's something about that aspect ratio that really does it for me. So when we were filming Missing, and I wanted to use that full frame 144. I had my guides for 16:9 and 240 just to be safe, because I have a bad habit of kind of like framing up, and then I'm like, okay, that's the frame, and I don't think about recropping or pushing in or anything like that. I think it just comes from my photography days or something. But so when I was shooting Missing, I was making these giant landscape shots and these interior shots, and I found that the same thing that I love about balancing the frame with the anamorphic, I found that it was really cool to balance the frame with so much height as well. So yeah, I found, I don't know, I love shooting in that really tall aspect ratio. And the project that I'm working on right now, I've been filming it full frame as well, although I will be cropping for 16:9 because I want it to be as accessible to folks across as many platforms as they can get it. The one thing that is a little bit of a bummer about that 144 is that, if you're looking at it on a phone, which, unfortunately everybody watches everything that we do on phones, it's a tiny square, and that's kind of a drag. So but for me, and for my personal sort of archive, we're shooting for full frame, and then we've got the opportunities to spit it out into different aspect ratios if need be. But I like to think of the personal projects as it's on my hard drive. We don't know where what the next screen size is going to be in the future, and it's just nice to preserve for that. So you've got it, and then you can always crop in and put letterbox on or whatever you want to do. But yeah, that's what I love about that native aspect ratio of these full frame cameras now, is that you do have a little bit more latitude in how you'd like to crop it after the fact if you're feeling inspired.
Yeah, I think for me there's a big difference between commercial and narrative. And with commercial, you're usually tied down to what the client or agency wants. Sometimes there's a little bit of leeway, but it's kind of hard to get them away from the stuff that they just see on TV all day, every day. Once in a while you do get some good collaborators that are willing to explore, shooting anamorphic, and maybe you can convince them to do like a director's cut that's 239, but you keep 16:9 safe, so you still get the flares and distortion and all that stuff. It's also become pretty common these days to have to shoot for square, to have to shoot for vertical, and keep all that stuff in mind. Like the amount of times I'd have to explain that, like, I don't have to center frame everything. You can crop the 916 out of any part of the frame. And people have their mind blown about that. So you can just see that, like, the clients and agencies are, they're not evolving as quickly as the technology is. But as far as, projects they use, not like non-standard, I guess, aspect ratios. I did this commercial last year where it was a lot of portraiture, and we really wanted to use the 3:2 aspect ratio from the VENICE and have it feel like 35 millimeter portrait stills. And it came with the added benefit that it was much easier to pull out the 9:16 for social, which was a big part of the campaign. Now, as far as narrative, the feature I just did in December, typically I'll lean towards 239, but I think I've kind of been getting a little bit bored with it in the last few years. And we also had, we were shooting most of this stuff in a farmhouse. We had actors that were tall. We had children that, are a lot shorter. So we kind of met in the middle. I'm not a big fan of like 1:8:5, which I know like Deakins is a big fan of, but I really like 2:1. I think 2:1 is a really, it just feels really good. And it allowed us to, put the different actors of the different heights in the same frame. So we got 2:1 up.
Actually, and I'd like to show some of that stuff too. So I believe we have, well, we should show The Last Job. So why don't we talk about that
Sure.
first? Because that was something you shot pretty early on in the VENICE development. And I know you were one of the first to get your hands on the Rialto, which, for those that don't know, is that piece that essentially lets you take the center block off the front of the camera and puts us on this kind of remote head that you can then operate from inside, in your case, the vehicle. Which we thought was pretty fascinating. So why don't we play The Last Job, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about it, and see what how he used it, and I think, again, we thought it was kind of an interesting use case for that particular technology.
Go, 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 go!
Get us the fuck out of here!
Look, move, move!
Why are you driving so slow?
Come on, drive faster!
You want to draw more attention?
And what the fuck was wrong? What is up? What the fuck was that?
Safety was
There is no fucking safety. Didn't you even look at the gun before you put it in your jacket?
Get the bag.
The bag. The bag?
Get the bag.
Bag. Okay, I had the bag. Okay, I had the bag.
Guns.
Guns
in the bag.
Guns. Okay, got it.
Give me the gun. Give me the gun.
Here you go. Okay, what else? What about the messenger bag? Messenger bag.
The gloves.
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 Okay, the gloves. Give me the gloves.
Give me your gloves.
Oh shit! Shit! Give me the rest of the stuff.
I can't go back. I can't go
You're
back.
You're not going back, okay? We'll figure something out.
Figure what out?
Right.
What are we gonna figure
It's
out?
all right. We can still get the money. Right?
Fuck the money. I don't care about the money.
We are now unmuted. So I don't know how much people heard on YouTube there, but we're just kind of chatting while that clip was playing amongst ourselves how you were able to sit in the back seat using Summicron lenses and get really, really close to the actors. And that was just sort of the whole sequence, obviously, and with no editing. But can you talk a little bit about your experiences with that, kind of playing with that format and just being in that sort of handheld mode?
Yeah, for sure. That shot in particular was really fun. I mean, that was one of those examples where I convinced the director to let me do that. He had the whole thing planned out as a oneer from a gimbal attached to the front of the car. And actually, I see in the YouTube chat, my man Andres Torres, who was our gimbal tech on that shoot. I was a little worried that if there was something that didn't work for the final cut of it in his one take, I wanted him to have something to cut between, and he ended up using it and using good chunks of it. So that shot was actually just straight out of camera. It's not edited and it's not sound designed or anything. I just wanted to show off, just how much you can do inside a car with that little piece of equipment, with a tiny lens on it. And people that know me in person, like I'm 6'5", like I'm not I'm not small. So to be able to, sit in there and be able to turn the camera back and forth and see all four people in the car, it was just such a cool perspective.
Yeah, or I think in some of these pictures you literally had it jammed against the windshield because you didn't have a process trailer. This is just someone driving.
Correct. Yeah. The director also didn't want to be outside of the car looking in. He wanted to be inside with the characters the whole time, which is why I recommended the Rialto.
Yeah, really neat.
Yeah, and this was crazy. I mean, here's another thing with large format. The sensors are getting better across the board regardless, but when you have a much larger sensor with either bigger pixels or more pixels and you scale it down, you get a lot less noise. So we were able to really push this stuff. Like a lot of this stuff was at, with the 2500 mode, and we were lighting things, with like one little Q20 tube on the front of the car. And there was the intro shot to this piece has a guy coming out of his house waiting to be picked up by these guys in the car, and we had to pull a bunch of flags out of the grip truck and flag off street lights from 3 blocks away because it was interfering with our shot.
Wild. Cool. And at this point, I actually wanted to see if there's any questions from our YouTube audience, and I did realize I forgot to introduce Nick Samara, who is joining us from our LA office. He will be chiming in with any of our questions from the YouTube audience, so please ask away. We'll make sure that they get in front of Alex and David. But if there's any questions, I'll throw it to Nick, but if not, we can continue on. How are we looking, Nick?
Hi, everyone. I think we're doing pretty good. David already kind of alluded a little bit to one of Andres' questions, but maybe if you had anything more to say on that about using lightweight gimbals as hotheads or remote heads, David, that was a question specifically. You see that as being a big part of your future workflow, especially with the small camera setup needs?
I think it just goes back to having an arsenal of tools. I think when gimbals first kind of hit the market, it was kind of billed as this like, okay, it's going to take over everything and we're going to shoot it all on gimbals. And it took a year or two and people realized that it's a tool for specific purposes. That's kind of how I look at everything. I look at cameras, glass, support, everything is a tool that me achieve a certain look and tell the story in a certain way. I'm just glad that there are more options, and I think I'm not going to be operating like handheld gimbals or anything myself. That's not my game. Like I'd much rather hire a professional like Andres who, shows up with his truck and all the bits and pieces and knows how to make it. I can tell, we can work together on creating a shot. It's like working with a Steadicam operator.
Well, thank you for that. And again, for anyone that's watching us and joining us on YouTube, please ask those questions, chat them away, and we'll make sure that we get them in front of Alex and David. So switching gears a little bit, now that we're all cooped up inside, what are you guys working on these days? How do you stay creative? Like, I always find it fascinating to see sort of the hobbies that everyone's working on in between these projects. And David's going to bring his sourdough. So we know he's baking sourdough, and we'll have a lot of tips about different starters that he's got. When it comes to your creative muscles, if you will, like what are you doing to, and obviously earlier, Alexander, you mentioned that you're working on a project too called Vacant, Not Vanquished, which is a series of stills that you're doing around the city, sort of portraits, if you will. But what other things are you sort of working on during these times?
Well, just speaking for myself, this has been a really challenging time for, the business. We all started this decade off with high hopes. I was going to bring David out to Los Angeles. We were going to make some commercials together. This fucking thing really threw a wrench in the works. But trying to stay busy with a lot of personal projects. I mean, unfortunately, given the circumstances, it is a bit of a blessing being able to kind of like sit at home and think about, projects that were kind of on the back burner. I updated my website recently. It's like there are a lot of things that kind of collect dust when you're busy all the time. And so there has been a bit of a nice opportunity after the initial sort of freak out went down to kind of like collect yourself and say, okay, what are we going to do with this time? How are we going to be creative, and how are we going to use this time for something positive? Because I think that it's really important that when you're a healthy person in this particular moment in time, to make the most of it, because there's a lot of folks out there who are having an incredibly rough go of it. And I've learned to not take that for granted as much as I used to. So it's been doing a lot of personal projects, and also that project that you mentioned. I'm working on something. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. This town is incredibly important and special to me. That's why I have a New York Chapters is a documentary series that I've been putting together for 4 years now, just to celebrate people in New York. And so I found that, in situations like this, especially in this town, and especially the fact that this is the epicenter globally of the whole situation, that as an artist, it's important for me to do what I can to get out there and celebrate the folks who are living through this incredibly challenging time in history. So I've been going around sort of documenting the city, through the LF in the back of my car. I go out with a 50 and an 18, and I've been shooting wide shots of places in New York that are both iconic and special to me. And so I've been rolling video on that for 30 to 2 minutes, because ultimately I see this as sort of a nice opportunity for future generations to see what the city was like. I love that footage that came out a couple years ago. They did a 4K scan of like some footage of Flatiron District in 1918 or something like that. Like, blew me away. I loved that. So this is kind of me doing that again, to be honest, with the best camera on the market, with the most beautiful glass, so that we've got a legitimate documentation of what's going on. I'm working on putting together the voiceover that my good friend is going to be narrating, and I've been kind of going around and shooting a lot of these wide landscapes, but now I'm focusing on humanity. And I'll end up juxtaposing the humanity with these landscapes for the final project. There's Gem Spa right there. That place literally just got torn down yesterday, 2 days ago. That's a New York institution that no longer exists. So, it's one of these projects that is incredibly important to me, because, we're here and we're living through this. And at some point in the future, there will be a vaccine or something, and this will be over. And I think it's incredibly important for us as artists to, remind people that that this is something that happened and that New Yorkers came together, and the solidarity of the people in this town is something that no other society has, in my opinion. We've been through 9/11, we were through the housing market. This town feels the most in most of these unfortunate circumstances, and the fact that we were the epicenter of this thing, it's rattling to me. So anyway, that's a project that I'm working on. That's hopefully I'm going to be done with that soon. I'm having a really hard time stopping it because every day I go out and I shoot more, and it's tough to kind of like hang up this project. So essentially what's going to end up happening is once this is done, which I'm anticipating it'll be done in the next week or two, my plan is to now go on the road and live out of a trailer for a couple months and do the same thing cross country. Because I think that, not only is it important to show what's happening in our own backyard, but also nationally, because there are a lot of differences, and I can understand it. I mean, people from Montana see New York, and they couldn't be any different. It's night and day, culturally speaking, proximity speaking. And so even though we're in the thick of it, those folks are saying, oh well, we're good. But unfortunately what's happening is, now that people are coming out, it's very possible that this virus can spread to more rural areas and that sort of thing. So I'm going to be going across the country and documenting that as just another personal project. I mean, listen, I'm not working, and I've got these tools and the means to go. And so that's, I find it to be a little bit of a responsibility, and also just something to pass the time too. I mean, the fact is we're all sitting here waiting for the phone to ring, and New York we're going to be in this for a while. And so I'm trying to make the most of the situation and give something back. If there were a way to enlist as an EMT or a paramedic, or like drive an ambulance to give these guys a little bit of a break, I would do that, but I can't. So, instead I would prefer to go out, document this moment in history so that there's a record on a beautiful camera and beautiful lenses, so that future generations can see, what this was like. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
What a fantastic time capsule. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And I have to say, you both of you are very, very generous with your knowledge on Instagram, especially. So you mentioned the project of driving across the country, and that sort of mirrors another thing that you did earlier, kind of a suspect with, like I said, a Toyota pickup truck, where you drove around and did some documenting. And I know, again, David, you of course have a ton of info as well on your Instagram, where you're showing lighting plots and diagrams. So for those that haven't or are not already following Alexander and David on Instagram, by all means, you have to do it, because it's some of the best eye candy out there, in my opinion. So it's for Alexander, it's at #Hankoff, and at @Kruta for David. But again, I want to thank you for that. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you, David. So what were you about to say as far as what you're working on these days? And maybe you can speak a little bit about Cinematography Salon too, because that's kind of a cool project as well that you've been doing. Not specifically close, but just as a really cool project.
Yeah, for sure. So, for people that don't know, I run a Facebook group for cinematographers and cinematography adjacent folks. So, there's colorists and vendors and operators and all that in there. It's called Cinematography Salon, but the running joke right now is that it's Unemployment Salon. And it's just filled with conversations about, how people are getting unemployment, or how the system is not working for them. Some people manage to get in right away. Some people, it's taking, 6 weeks or longer for them to start getting any sort of response. So it's been eye-opening, but also sort of comforting, knowing that, I hate the cliche lines, but like, we're all in this together, that kind of thing. Because our entire industry is shut down right now. So it's really inspiring and wonderful to see people kind of coming together and sharing their experiences and helping each other out. I've heard of people being sick, and just random strangers on the group being like, okay, I'm coming over. I'm bringing chicken noodle soup or something like that and dropping it at your doorstep. So it's pretty amazing seeing the community come together right now. And I think it's a good time in the sense that it gives a lot of people a break from the rat race. It's so easy to get just caught up in like working every single day and when's the next job coming in and just keeping that going, that now we're kind of forced to take a minute to realize like, okay, who are the people, who are the humans around us, and how can we interact and how can we get to know each other better? So when we come out of this, I think people are going to be a little bit more cognizant about just being better to each other and taking care of each other, and not necessarily worrying so much about like, what does the agency have to say about something? It's like, okay, no, we're humans. Like, let's be kind to each other and help each other out.
Cool. And then outside of cinematography salon, what other things are you working on these days, other than sourdough, of course?
Yeah, cooking has been a passion of mine for 25 years. I actually almost went into the culinary arts before I got into film, and it's just something that to piggyback off of us all being humans and interacting with each other and being good to each other. My favorite thing about cooking is sitting down and feeding people and enjoying a meal together. So unfortunately, I can't really do that much these days, but even just interacting with people online, posting photos of what we're cooking, learning new techniques. Once in a while, I'll drop off a loaf or something to a friend in the neighborhood. That's relatively fulfilling. And then it's mostly just like self-improvement, like catching up on books and reading and American cinematographer, that sort of thing.
Very cool. And then I want to switch a little bit to just talk a little bit about, for folks that are just starting into the business, it can be definitely a daunting industry. Freelance especially, it's often feast and famine, or famine, as the expression goes. And maybe these days, unfortunately, a little bit more famine than feast. But what are your general advice to folks that are starting into the business? What do you do when things are quiet in sort of normal non-COVID times? Any advice for those that are just starting?
I'm always a huge advocate for creating your own stuff as much as you possibly can. I think it's really important to just get out there and shoot whatever you think interests you. I started that New York Chapters documentary project 5 years ago, and a lot of work came from that, and that wasn't even made to generate work. That was just a glimpse into sort of what my sensibilities were and what I cared about and sort of my take on humanity. And it turned into a bunch of commercial jobs because folks saw what I cared about. So I think that for me, my advice to sort of like young DPs, directors, or not even young, if you're trying to break into the business, however, just find what resonates with you and pursue it, at all costs. Everybody's got a beautiful camera phone in their pocket now. We were shooting on 5Ds, and, that was a big deal. That changed everything. And now you can set up an iPhone with a wide angle lens on like a DJI Movi or whatever they call that thing, and get awesome shit. I shot a ton of that stuff when I was in Las Vegas last year, just because I thought that it would make for really cool tracking shots, and it was just a fun experiment. So the tools are there, and just get out and do it, and then see who responds to it. Instagram is great, Vimeo is great, YouTube. There's so many ways of getting eyeballs on your work now, and capturing it beautifully, that you don't need the big guns that Dave and I are working with all the time. I've never been about that. I got those tools because I was at a certain point in my career where it was smart to kind of differentiate myself a little bit from the crowd. But I would never recommend anybody go out and buy some crazy equipment just because they think that that's what it takes to be a cinematographer. It's not. You can rent stuff on ShareGrid. You can rent stuff at Able. All that kind of stuff. Everything's accessible. So creating stuff is number one, and then finding your voice and not being afraid to fuck up and fail and overexpose and underexpose and all that stuff. I mean, like that just comes with time. But authenticity is incredibly important, and people will see what you're capable of doing and gravitate towards that. So as long as you're out there and you're creating as much content as you can that feels true to you, you will find an audience eventually.
Yeah, the tools are so available these days. You know, I remember in my career when the 5D came out, and I didn't have to use a lens adapter anymore. I was so thrilled, even with this crappy little 30 frames per second 8-bit codec, to be able to shoot stuff with like a native depth of field, be able to shoot stuff at night, and just that was what, like $3,000 for that, and you can go out and shoot amazing stuff. And these days it's the same thing. I don't know if you have do you have the caught up stuff on there?
Yes, we have caught up the music video. We can definitely load that.
Yeah, maybe some stills or something, because this was shot with it was with my Lomos, but it was on the A7R2. I mean, these days you can buy that one for what, like $1,200 or something. Like the tools are there, and the movie what you're looking at right now with the Venice there, I lit most of it with these like little $90 aperture lights that were set to candle mode, and literally we would have one over here, one over here, and that was our lighting for an entire scene. So I think it's a matter of having the creativity to push boundaries, to take risks, to be comfortable and confident in your vision. And for me, the last thing that I'd say is to just be nice. I know people that are really good at their jobs, and they don't get hired again with the same people because they're not nice, and vice versa. People that aren't that great technicians or anything that will get hired because they have a great attitude.
Yeah, so we're looking right now at some of the stills from Caught Up. And were you saying you used those little lights for this, or was that for the Last Thing Mary Saw?
For the Last Thing Mary Saw. Okay. So for I guess I've got like, what is this? I don't know, weird thumbnail in here. Yeah, so for Caught Up, I literally, what was that? That was it was $30 worth of Amazon LEDs and 2 DJ lights from Guitar Center. So, and $3,000 worth of camera gear.
There's a lot of VFX in this too, though, right? Because you had kind of that nebula or sort of star system kind of built into that as well. Was that all part of it?
Yeah, those were, as far as I know, those were all pulled favors with VFX artists.
Okay.
Because you know how music videos go.
And then just as far as talking about prep, while we look at some of these beautiful shots, we talked a little bit about sort of talking with the agency or the director and kind of coming up with a look and how you may or want to inject yourself a little bit, or when you choose to step back a little bit as well. But what as far as prep goes, like once you've looked at the script or looked at the spec and figured out the gear that fits the project the best, what other decisions go into informing the look? Like, do you work with lookup tables? Are you sort of doing previs stuff and you arrive on set with Video Village and everyone's looking at the sort of established look with a DIT, or are you kind of shoot everything in kind of a flat log or raw mode and just expect the grade to kind of do everything after the fact? I'd be curious of your processes, and I'm sure it's different for both of you and for the type of project you're working on, but could you say, like, generally speaking, one over the other?
I like shooting for the grade. I used to. I wish I did still, but the client went away, unfortunately. But I used to do a lot with Estee Lauder, and that was a great client. And for that's incredibly beauty focused. And I would focus primarily on exposure and making sure that the skin tones looked good, and that we had really nice depth of field going on, to bring out the model's eyes and face and this sort of thing. And then I would shoot everything as precisely as I can, and then bring it into post for a proper color grade. I think one of the things about being savvy enough with what is required in post on commercial jobs, is it puts the clients at ease tremendously. There's always, there's a hell of a lot of money on the line. There are a lot of folks who, are never going to trust you completely. There's just too many scary variables if this shit goes wrong. So I think that it's important for DP or director DP to really know each part of the process, from pre all the way through post, so that you can be on set and speak to what the process is going to be like once the job wraps up. I find this to be an incredible asset across all jobs, no matter how big or small they are. It's just really nice to be able to put people at ease. And so, yeah, shooting and knowing what you've got so that you can then create the look that you're going for in post is incredibly important, in my opinion. I like having a DIT on set that who can sort of do a one light kind of approach to what we think where we'd like to be, but then having a nice dense histogram, negative, whatever you want to call it, so you can bring it into post and play around with it. That's the best. So I'm always like watching like a hawk for exposure at all times, because I know that, especially with the cameras that we've got, the latitude is incredible and you can really push and pull things around. But if you screw up that first exposure, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's me coming from the photography world, but that makes me nervous. So I like to get everything like dead on, because then in post you can always bring it down, or you can bump it up. I know David, just did this beautiful film where everything was candle lit and all that, and I'm sure that you were watching the exposure like crazy, because in post in the grade, I'm sure you're going to be pulling that stuff all over the place. But if the information isn't there, then you're screwed.
Yeah, we going over to LUTs, like we had a pretty aggressive nighttime LUT, which I got to learn. I had to kind of learn it a bit on set. We didn't have a chance to do a proper camera test with a projector. But coming from having shot Alexa for years, like I've been in enough grades and enough tests to know that if my meter says something, then I know it's within range or not within range. So with the Venice and the LUT, it was just kind of getting comfortable with that. And we're, for the nighttime stuff, I definitely made it look darker on the monitor because of the LUT, but we were capturing more information so that we would have the room to play around with, because there's nothing worse than a thin negative. Or you can't really get it to look the way you want in post. But I think the importance of having a LUT is that the look that you're trying to achieve gets passed down through the pipeline. As a DP specifically, I don't have as much control as someone that's director DP or just a director or anything like that. So being able to retain the information in the raw, but also put out dailies that have the look that I want, that's the ideal situation.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at here is some of those stills that you mentioned, the low light stuff of the last thing we saw.
Yeah.
Actually, if you go back, can you go back a couple stills to the orange, or is it? Yeah, this one. So this kind of goes back to like creativity and thinking outside the box. Like, you don't need a giant truck full of lights. We used real flames when they were on screen, but when they were off screen, we had limited torches. So I went on Amazon and I tested a bunch of these like LED fire lights, and what you're seeing in this picture, you're looking at maybe $100 worth of lighting. And it's just sat in the milk crate, pull it out whenever we needed it.
Including the big sort of fill light behind, or just the sort of special that we see in the front there?
Just the specials. The big one in the back was our 1 HMI.
And there's a, I don't know if I have it here, I'll see if I have it, but there's a clip of, I guess you shot it with your phone or whatever, but you could just see those in action, and you see them kind of like flickering like fire or like candlelight. So that works well. So this is you using light meter, which is nice to see. And for those that aren't familiar, shooting a thin negative, even though we're not shooting film here, the idea is that most of these cameras that we're talking about are hungry for light. So the more light you can bring it chances are you can recover, even if you're worried about things like overexposure. I forget who said it, but it's a great expression that we've conquered overexposure. So feel free to fill your histogram, feel free to fill your exposure with a lot of light and bring it down later, because it'll net you a much cleaner picture versus trying to starve the camera of light and then trying to fix that part in post. So actually, this is another great example of that sort of the specials they're using in the corner there, and then just like a big fill and a little, nice sources to get that kind of candlelit effect. Do we have any shots of this sort of behind the lens, as it were, that weren't just BTS pictures, like frame?
Unfortunately, I can't share any of those yet.
Okay, so we'll be on the lookout for those.
Yeah, but like in this setup, you can see the little firelight. Then we have that one in the top left. We call that a ghost light, and it's just a sky panel S30. And then I think there's one of these little apertures floating around in there somewhere, but maybe you can't see it from this perspective. But it's minimal. It's atmosphere. It's a couple of lights, and it's just putting out enough to to make the image and keep a mood. This one was interesting because we had a room with windows, and I wanted to be able to essentially move the windows around for faces. So we dressed it up as if it were a window. So if you go back, you can see the reflection of the specific light looking like a window in the eyes. And that's that's a trick I stole from Steve Yedlin. So credit him.
Yeah, it's really cool. And again, this is where I mentioned earlier that both of you guys have a lot of this type of info on your Instagram accounts too. So that's kudos to you guys for being so generous with your knowledge and expertise. Yeah, this one I wanted to know more about.
Yeah, so we had a sequence with a ton of actors, and it was a really low budget film. So any days with huge ensembles were crazy expensive. So since we're shooting in the winter, we have like 7 hours of daylight, maybe less. So we tented in this room and lit it so that we could shoot the full 12 hours with the actors, with the same lighting, essentially turning it into a stage. And it was one of those situations where you day play a couple of units. I think this was 4 HMIs and some extra grippage for the day.
Very cool. I think this
That's
is
one of the monitor shots. That one I'm allowed to show.
Yeah, sort of quote unquote frame grab, meaning you took a picture of the monitor.
Yeah. There is an official still, which is that as well. So it's okay.
This gives an idea of the mood you're looking for as well. So I think that's pretty interesting. Very cool. So yeah, thank you for sharing these. And I do want to mention one last thing as far as prep goes, or maybe not one last thing, but one more thing I thought was really fascinating. I have a little Ricoh Beta or 360 camera on your shoulder. Can you show what you do with that? Because that's
yeah. I think my headphones are dying, so hold on. I think I might have to take these out. How's that? Sorry, stand by 1 second. Can you guys hear me?
I hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so, for scouting, one of the big things is being able to, map out the locations. And I found it really difficult unless you're taking crazy notes that you're always going to miss something. So I bought this 360 camera, and I'll bring it to me with me on set. This is from a commercial I did, right before lockdown. And I just go into the rooms that we're scouting, and I can look all around. I can revisit the location. And then that means that, if we're looking at like, oh, how many windows do we have to black out? I can just pull this up and count it right there. Oh, what's behind me when I'm in that hallway? Just pull up the screen and you're good to go. So that's been a real big part of prep. And I've been making a big push recently to do prep as well as possible. And I've been asking a lot of other DPs about how they do it. Because I find that all these little tips and tricks, they just make the actual day go so much smoother.
Very cool. And when you say prep, of course, you're talking about prepping, not what the AC would do at the rental house, but sort of before that even happens, right. Like scouting and blocking and everything else. Right?
Exactly.
Alexander, what's your process like? I know you tend to do little things a little bit more. I'd say run and gun, but somehow you're schlepping a 40-pound camera.
Slapdash is the word, I believe. I don't know. I mean, it's the same, right? I mean, I'm playing it very blasé, but I take this stuff just as seriously as anybody. I try to find locations that are going to benefit whatever the project is. With the approach, I love being able to shoot through windows, similar to how David worked on his film. I think that's the best. If I can find a way to motivate the light, that really helps. So when I'm on location scouts and I'm walking around with my gaffer and my key grip, it's really, it comes down to that sort of thing logistically. Because I'm directing and DPing the majority of the work that I do, I try to create environments that are going to be as sort of easy to light as possible, but also as elegant. I mean, I'm not, once I'm set, I'm pretty happy. Usually that takes a little bit longer because I'm running around and I'm dealing with talent and whatnot. But I trust my gaffers and my grips tremendously. I've worked with the same team a lot. They kind of know my aesthetic all at this point. So when we're in prep and scouting and that sort of thing, everybody kind of knows the vibe going in. They know how I want to motivate the light, what the shots are. I shoot for the edit like crazy. Like I know exactly what I'm going to do when we step in. So it makes things a lot easier. I try to storyboard out while I'm on the scout if I've got a really good understanding of what needs to be done. I love storyboards, but they don't really do much for me aside from kind of explaining to the client what I'm trying to do. But I find that once I've got a relationship with the client, if it's a multiple or if it's a return client, I'll just show up on the day and shoot frames off of my camera and put that together as sort of my storyboard and then send that to them. So that's, my prep is sort of, I don't know, this sounds whatever, but it's like, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And then we kind of get into it. But yeah, I mean, once that relationship is established, prep is great, because everybody's on board. They know what I'm trying to accomplish, and it comes down to a level of trust. But again, yeah, I mean, you're right. My approach is a little more sort of organic, even when everything's storyboarded out. But I like it that way because it allows us to have opportunities to, improvise and find those happy accidents and stuff like that. And a lot of my stuff is not really set in stone when I show up. There's a lot of that, going in for the initial concepting and like, this is what we want to do. But then once we're on set and once the client and agency kind of understand my vibe, it's like, okay, cool. Like, this is what we're going to do, but give me a chance to get this as well, because I think that'll cut in nicely and this sort of thing. So it's like everything kind of goes organically as much as it can. And I move really fast. So for me, prep is really big too, in that sense, because I like to get on set and I like to know that everything is buttoned up so that then we can just like scream through stuff. Because I don't do multiple takes. I'll shoot the same setup a few times. And if I feel good about it and I look over to the agency, and I'm like, are we good? And they give me the thumbs up and we move on. So, that's another reason why prep for me is incredibly important in the real preliminary stages, so that exactly what we're trying to do. We step on and we bang it out. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like my weird haphazard approach, but every job is different. And some jobs are a little bit more conservative than others. And sometimes you have to be a little bit more by the book. But then other clients and agencies understand, what my style is and how I can kind of just like throw the camera on my shoulder and bang it out. And they're into that too, because we get a hell of a lot more done on the day. So, every job takes it's got its nuances, but that's essentially my approach. Is a hell of a lot of prep in the early stages, so that then you can kind of like it like muscle memory in your brain. So when you're on set, you can just kind of run.
Yeah, it gives you time for those happy accidents and for a little bit of improv when you've already nailed your shot list and you have an extra half hour or something.
Yeah, or if you're running behind and that you can lose stuff, or you can combine shots and that sort of thing as well, is huge.
We had a couple more questions from the YouTube audience. Now is a good time for those. Guys, what was your first major project and what did you take away from it, or what did you learn?
I don't want to tell anybody what my first project was. Are you kidding me?
First major
Terrible.
Yeah, we're not talking about our first projects. Like never. I'm maybe over a beer, like you and me. Like that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
First one you'll admit to. How's that?
Well, me too. I'd say honestly, like it was kind of major at the time. It was Concussion, which went to Sundance. It felt major to me because it was a really good script. I mean, the movie, I think the original budget until they got into post was like 90 grand or something. So it really wasn't a major project. But the script was really good. The people working on it and the actors and everybody was really great. And, you know, we just expected it to do decently at festivals and, you know, see it on a big screen. Like that's what I kept saying to the director. I'm like, we got to at least get like a good camera and decent lights so that when you watch it on a 60-foot screen, it's going to look great. And it ended up going into Sundance and Stacey Passon directed that. She was phenomenal. And I know she like jumped into TV afterwards. She's done another feature since then. And you know, for me, it helped me get an agent. It introduced me to the world of Sundance. I mean, it was just like this tiny little passion project that in retrospect turned out to be major. So if you're looking for, you know, like the biggest lights I've used on a project, like there's a few of those, but you know, I'd consider something like this major as far as my career is concerned.
Yeah, I'll speak to one of the projects that I'm most proud of. You know, and one of the early projects, similar to David, was my short film Yellow, which I co-directed with my dear friend Alex Maxwell years ago now. Feels like a million years ago. It was back in 2015, 2014. And that project that taught me a lot about just my sort of like newfound aesthetic as far as bringing sort of like a narrative documentary sensibility into like a narrative storyline, working in real environments under existing lighting conditions, really not augmenting much, finding ways of immersing yourself in a world that is already built so that when you place a plot within it, it looks like $1 million and it actually costs 5,000, you know? These kinds of little tricks were incredibly, very sort of formative for me in that particular project. Learned a hell of a lot. And I shot that as well. It got me into American Cinematographer and short takes, which was amazing. So thank you, AAC. And also when I was working with Chris Probst in January, I think he was doing something over at AAC back in the day. I was like, hey, you know, I was an American Cinematographer once, just so that he knew that I wasn't some schmuck, you know. But that project really taught me a lot, just about what you can do with a small crew and amazing locations and a good storyline. And I've brought that over on a hell of a lot of commercial projects and obviously with Missing as well. Like Missing is all about the environment. You know, you're putting this guy in these incredibly immersive worlds and there's no dialogue, but it keeps moving along because you're in these different locations and you're kind of moving along with him. So yeah, I learned a lot on Yellow as far as just like how to make something that looks expensive for you know, an incredibly low amount of money. And with a hell of a lot of good friends who are always down to ride with you. That's another huge advantage.
Very good. I think maybe some of the how selective you had to be with some of those projects maybe leads into the next question. And Andres wants to know, how much control do you have in the jobs you connect with? And what do you find works for you with between things like relationships with directors, your agents, or intentionally pursuing specific genres?
I think the genre thing really comes down to your body of work. You know, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, where you know, your work attracts certain genres, and then by having done that work, it goes back and forth. So you know, I personally focus more on sort of like dark, dramatic horror. You know, maybe a little bit of like landscapey type of stuff, but you know, like my aesthetic is not like bright comedy lighting. So, you know, I don't really get a lot of comedy scripts, for example.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, with the stuff that works for me in terms of connecting with people is, I like to connect with people outside of the workplace. Like some of my best collaborations that I've ever done have been with people that either we started collaborating and we just hit it off and became friends, or we started out as friends first and then started working on stuff together. And like a lot of people know that I'm a big fan of barbecue, for example. So people that I can, grill stuff with and talk about smoking meats with, like that is a great basis for, like a friendship. And then you have the trust. So you get on set together and it's like, okay, well, you've been talking about like what works in your rib rubs or your barbecue sauce. It's the same thing on set. You can be like, hey, this like light is working for me, or this color's not working for me. So just having that sort of trust and openness, that's led to the best and most lasting collaborations in my career.
What was the question again? What was it about control on set? Something like that?
How much control do you have in the jobs that you connect with? I think asking, whether you're getting more jobs that you're soliciting specifically, that sort of thing, or if you have any kind of control over how you're accruing work, I guess in a more normal time.
Right. I started in this industry on a little bit of a weird trajectory because I just did everything myself and I did a ton of spec stuff. And then ultimately had, a decent little reel, and then I put that in front of people, and then it led to like legitimate jobs, So I didn't even know what the hierarchy of a set looked like. I was like, well, I'm the director, so what do you mean? Like, what the hell is a creative director? Or like, what is an agency producer as opposed to my producer? You know what I mean? Like, I learned all that stuff real late. So now that I understand what that is, and I love those relationships, it's about finding out how to collaborate on a level so that everybody is happy with the final product. I mean, if you think about it, just from a business perspective, it's like, okay, so I get the job through a production company who has a relationship with an agency. This agency has been working on this concept for maybe a year, maybe longer. Maybe this is their first big job. So there's a lot at stake on their ends right off the bat. And so for me, I will never, and this is being recorded for perpetuity. I will never be that asshole director who walks on set and is like, all right, this is how it's going to go. It's like, that's insane. What are you talking about? You were given this job. There were like 100 other people who wanted this job. You got the job, and now you're going to alienate and be a dick to the client and the agency. I just don't understand. I don't get that. And I don't even know if that guy exists. I've heard he does. I've never met him, and I've worked as a DP and not just director DP. So like, I've never been on a set where there's some, big jerk director. But like, don't do that, first of all, because it's not cool. It's about having a vision for what the agency, at least, when it comes to commercials, what the agency is trying to accomplish, right? So they've sold something through the client, and the client's on board. Maybe they've fought tooth and nail against this idea, but they've got a Don Draper on the agency, and he's like, no, this is going to be great, right? So now you're here and you're doing this commercial, and everybody's excited about it or nervous about it or both. And it's up to you as the director to put everybody at ease, and to steer the ship. And so you can't be a dick, and you can't like just take over the whole thing, because there's no better relationship than a director and the creative director. I love that relationship, because the creative director can then go and talk to his team, who is liaising with the client, and it's this whole cohesive environment on set. And if you come in just like trying to take over the whole thing, first of all, you're going to look like an asshole. And secondly, the project is not going to be what the client and agency signed off on. It's about having a vision for it and executing that vision through the channels that brought that job to you in the first place. And so I think that's super, super important, because at the end of the day, that's how you get another gig with these guys. You can come on and you can be like, no, this is how it's going to be, and I'm walking off and be crazy. I don't know who would ever do that, but you're never going to get another job with these guys if you do that, you know. So for me, it's really about collaboration, and I love the collaboration. And I especially appreciate it because I do wear a lot of hats, and you know, if I'm DPing something and directing it, I need to step off and go talk to my G&E guys. I want to know that the creative director is feeling good, and that he and I have a relationship, or she and I have a relationship, and that he can kind of like go and maybe do a little bit more of what a traditional director would do, which is like managing the agency and managing the client, you know. Because if I'm running over there and I'm talking to my gaffer about hanging some lights, I'm not talking to the client. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's important for that collaboration to be authentic and legit, because you're not going to get another job if you're a jerk, and they're making it easier on you because you've got a lot going on. They're handling certain little nuanced sides of the approach. So as far as control is concerned, I love to come in with a strong vision, know that everybody's aligned, give everybody as much confidence as possible. You know, it's like, listen, I love this project. I know that we're going to bang this out, and it's going to be beautiful, and you're going to be so happy, and it's going to elevate your brand. But I want to hear feedback throughout the day so that everybody goes home feeling great, as opposed to like, ah, shit, he didn't listen to that note that I had, and now we're going to have to change the edit, or we're going to have to cut this thing out, or we're going to, you know, there's a million things, because everybody has this idea in their head of what they want the project to be. So if you go in with an aligned approach right off the bat with your client and your agency, then you can't lose, because everybody's got an understanding of what's at stake, and nobody's being a big asshole about it, you know? So that's my roundabout way of imparting some wisdom to people who may think that they're fucking Orson Welles on a commercial set selling mayonnaise. You're not. Just do the job and be nice to people, and then be a dick on your own projects when you're shooting it all by yourself.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a lot of recurring clients, and I was going to say, you know, most of my business comes from word of mouth and from recurring business. And I think that's kind of a testament to what you said about, you know, being nice and being collaborative and being honest and open and you know, working together, as opposed to like, you know, being a dictator.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to. And that's what I love about this business, man. You know, it's like I'm a crew centric director. I come from being super hands-on and dirty, and I love that. You know, I love my crew. I like that my crew gets, you know, I fight for my crew to be treated properly and get paid properly and all that. That's the best part of this job, you know, and I'm glad that that's my background, you know, and you and I are friends because we share similar sensibilities. And you know, there are other people who have approached, you know, the director chair in different respects, you know, but I'm glad that I came up through doing it myself and crewing up, because I think that it just gives you a much better sort of bird's eye view of the way the entire sort of like war map is planned out, as opposed to just having blinders on and have being, you know, a VFX soup or something, and now you're directing, because you really only know like that world, which is great. And I'm friends with lots of VFX soups. I'm just saying, like, it's nice to kind of understand what everybody is doing, so that when you come in and you are sitting in that chair, you can kind of speak to all parts of the production from a place of experience and empathy, you know.
Definitely sounds like solid advice. There's one more YouTube question for you guys. Jonathan wants to know of both of you, what's been your most challenging shoot to date? And do you have any notable mistakes or accidents that have been burned into your mind as a result?
I'm trying. Sorry to interrupt. This is Jonathan Wang, who I've worked with, and he's very handsome, very capable, wonderful AC from Los Angeles. And I'm trying to think of a project I was on with him where shit went to, you know, things went to hell. I can't think of anything. So go ahead, Dave. I'll try to come up with a fun anecdote for this one.
Let me think. So I had a hiatus from features for about 5 years because I did like 3 in a row, and they were all incredibly challenging and just draining. And sadly, they basically never went anywhere. I think they just ended up on like streaming services. But for notable mistakes and accidents, I have a very specific story. Before I was a DP, I came up as a DIT in Phantom Tech, and it was my first time getting hired. I was working in Boston, and I got hired on a Majors. It was a $85 million comedy film. And so I show up, they throw this Phantom package at me. I've never been on a set this big. I mean, this was 85 times the largest set I had been on prior to that. And so we get into the location, and they have this this like boxing ring set up, and the lead actor is in this scene is supposed to get kicked in the face by someone else. And so they have 3 camera teams. They've got 10 and 10 G&E, maybe more. 250 extras for the crowd. We got the DP sitting next to me, and I'm so nervous. I'm like setting up the laptop, because back then it was all controlled on the on a PC. I'm setting it up, and the if anybody's ever played with Phantom before, the earlier versions of the software were like next to unusable. Like, it was total trash. So it has this one stupid setting when you start it up from scratch, the default setting deep down in the menu. I don't know why it even exists, but if you don't uncheck it, it'll roll the buffer, it'll roll the clip, and then it'll immediately delete everything. So we did this. We're all set up. I say we're good to go, and I watch the buffer fill up, and the director yells cut, and I hit the button, and I literally watch the take just disappear right in front of all these people, right after Kevin James, the actor, had gotten kicked in the head. And I have to turn to the DP and say, I'm sorry, like, we had technical difficulties. We didn't get that take. We need to kick Kevin James in the head again. He lost his shit. He screamed at me in front of everybody, just one of the most like unbelievably like stress-inducing moments of my life. I'm like almost kind of shaking about it again, but I literally was like shaking. We did the take again, got it. He's like, okay, good. Grabbed the laptop, went out to the camera truck, and just like shook for the next hour and a half, thinking that like my career was over before it even began.
I was a DIT for a minute too. Those are the most horrifying experiences. Okay, mine is not as scary as yours, but I'll never forget it. I was DITing on an Advil commercial at Regis Philbin's house in Greenwich, Connecticut, and it was a union job. I don't even know how the hell I got on it. Like, that's a long story. But I was trying to like cut my teeth as a DIT. This was like 10 years ago, and I'm out here with all these like salty union dudes on Regis's tennis court. And I've got like my mobile DIT setup going, and I'm like super green, and I'm just out of my league. And I'm looking around, I'm like, what the hell am I even doing here? This is crazy. Like, I can manage media. Okay, great. I guess that's how I got here. But I'm trying to set up a flag to block the light over my laptop and my monitor. And I'm like struggling so bad because number one, I'm super nervous. Number two, I just don't know how the hell to set a flag. I still don't. No, I'm just kidding. And I'm trying to set up this flag, and I'm struggling with it. And I'm like, I got it bent the wrong way, and like, it's all fucked. And these 2 union dudes are just looking at me like, look at this guy just having the hardest time with this stupid floppy, And I look over at them, and I'm like, hey, you guys help me out with this, please? And they're like, sure, buddy, we'll help you out. And I was like, God damn it. And I sat there and I watched them, and it was the easiest thing, obviously, right? They like did the floppy move, pulled down the Velcro, hung the fucking flag in 2 seconds, and walked away. And I was like, wow, I might just have to like go live in this, be in the trailer for the rest of the day, because I can't look at these guys again. It was like I was mortified. So I don't know. So that's my. I learned how to set a floppy up that day, David.
And that's what's important. See, so
I didn't lose any footage though. I didn't lose any fucking footage that day. So
As I say, so you learn from that mistake. You now know about that setting that's deep in the Phantom menu, and Alex, you now know how to set up a floppy. So
You go.
that's where the experience comes from. So I just have one last question before we wrap, because we're running out a little bit of time here. But this is more of a little bit more casual question. What are you watching these days? What series, what Netflix shows are you guys binging on? It's always interesting to see what we watch on the other side of the screen, as it were. That good, huh?
David's he's rewatching Lost.
Oh God, no! I'm never gonna rewatch that. No, I think I'm a bit of a masochist. I watched Contagion last night, and I'm halfway through World War Z. So, yeah, maybe too topical, I guess.
Yeah, Contagion was good. I watched Contagion when this just started because I'm a crazy person too, and like they really got the terminology down. That screenplay, like they did their research. They were talking about social distancing. They were talking about it was crazy. It was very spooky actually to watch. So yeah, and then didn't Matt Damon's kid get contagioned in that movie, and his kid in real life did too, unfortunately. So,
Oh, really? I didn't know it was real life.
art imitates life. I'm getting a buzz. Sorry. What am I watching? I'm watching The Sopranos. I never watched the whole show. So I'm
Great
just
show.
doing it from the beginning. Yeah. And then Tiger King, of course.
Well, that was great. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun talking to both of you. I want to thank you again for your generosity with your time and knowledge and imparting your fantastic stories. And as a reminder to everyone on watching us on YouTube, to make sure to follow David and Alex on the social media. And if it's okay with you guys, we can go ahead and share that info with everyone, maybe in a follow-up email. But like earlier, I mentioned that it's D Kruta and hashtag Hankoff if you want to follow these.
Yeah, follow David's stuff. It's David's stuff. It's incredibly his blog posts are fantastic. I mean, he's incredibly technically savvy, and I've learned a lot by following you, David. So please keep contributing, because I love people like you who post stuff on the internet and and educate the rest of us. So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Thanks for saying that.
Absolutely, and thank both of you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. Again, spending some time with us, and I want to thank everyone, of course, following us on the YouTube live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. Big hand, of course, to Alex and David once again, and stay tuned for more programming like this from Able City. But in the meantime, we'll catch you later. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.